Showing up shortly on Art Rocks, sculptures that literally glow in the dark.
Luminary art is art that uses light as an element in the same way that you'd use color or line as an element in a piece of art.
Creations mending a generation's pain. Looking for the essence of Mother Nature in the eye of the storm. And a reminder of the importance of the Red River during the American Civil War. That's all about to happen on Art Rocks.
Support for this program is provided by Georgia Pacific Port Hudson operations. Like the impulse that drives an artist's creativity, Georgia Pacific's 850 Louisiana employees are driven to produce quality paper products for your home and business. With additional support from the Renaissance Baton Rouge Hotel, centrally located for business and pleasure travel, the Renaissance offers intrigue, style, and southern hospitality. And by the Watermark Baton Rouge. Art, history, and commerce come together in the heart of downtown Baton Rouge at the Watermark, located in the historic Louisiana Trust and Savings Bank building. And by Prescience Point Capital Management, a fact-based private investment manager using forensic investigation to benefit clients. Research with impact. And by Ann Conley Fine Art, with the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and viewers like you.
Hello, I'm James Fox Smith, publisher of Country Roads magazine, and thank you for joining us for Art Rocks. Here, for your illumination, please meet a Monroe artist whose sculptures literally light up the rooms they occupy. Cindy Blair explains the techniques that light up her luminary artwork.
Luminary art is art that uses light as an element in the same way that you'd use color or line as an element in a piece of art. I'm using rice paper. It's an unsized rice paper, and I use glue to create sort of a paper mache. So what I do is I find an object that I really like, or I sculpt something from clay. So this piece here actually was formed from a vase that I really liked, the sort of ribbing of it. The ornament holder, I wanted that shape. You spray a release in there and then you lay down the paper into the mold. This rice paper, the way it grabs onto itself, it sort of meshes together. It's very fibrous. So when you put it into the mold with the glue, the layers mesh together and it makes a really hard shell. 3 layers get you a really nice hard shell. I'll use that as a base to mold off of using the rice paper mache process. There's a piece behind me that the legs of it, I sculpted out of clay and then I cast that, or I molded that with the rice paper. So I'm just playing with different objects, whatever serves the piece basically, but it's rice paper for the most part. And then that's reinforced with acrylic paint and then layers and layers of a self-leveling clear gel. It sort of seals it a bit and gives me different effects. You can get some nice depth with that when you're painting on top of it in layers. Right now I'm using just simple LED lights. I have a source for really good quality LED string lights, and that's all they are. Inside there's a frame made out of willow reed that holds the lights. I found these rats and I thought it would be hilarious to make a fun, sweet thing with using rats. I just thought that would be really funny. I sprayed them down with cooking oil and I laid 3 layers of the rice paper mache over that, let it harden, and then I cut it off and sort of popped them off the mold. I created a frame for the lights to go on with the willow reed. And it took 3 hours to wrap the lights for that piece. It's 33 feet of lights. And then I popped the shell back on top of it, sealed that up, and painted it. I'll do a layer of the acrylic self-leveling medium, and then on top of that, I will do layers and layers of paint and glaze. As a teaching artist, I teach color a lot, and I talk about color a lot. When I was doing that piece, I was referencing Kandinsky circles. So he did these sort of color theory circles. And so it's like I tell my students all the time, like you can start a piece and make a rule for yourself about how you're going to use color or how you're going to use pattern or whatever it is. And then you sort of stick to that rule as long as it serves you and it serves the piece. So I started thinking about the science fiction that I grew up watching. I was a huge Star Trek Next Generation fan, and the sort of creatures that they'd find, I was thinking this is something that you'd find on one of those planets. So that's really where all this comes from. And then also branching out, I accidentally ran across a National Geographic while I was teaching, and I saw all these coral reef worms, and they were so gorgeous. They were beautiful. You say worms and you think, ew, a gross thing, but no, they were really beautiful and the colors were amazing. I was like, this is it, these are my creatures. And so I started pulling from that. It's been a really nice journey. One of the first pieces I did was something called a crystalline entity spore. And if you've ever watched any Star Trek Next Generation, you know that the crystalline entity was this giant crystalline life form that lived in space, and they blew it up. But I thought to myself, what if that was the wrong thing to do? What if that's how this thing reproduces? It breaks off pieces of itself. And I was actually using styrofoam, so it looks like a little crystal formation, and it pulses. It kind of breathes. From there, I was thinking about really wanting to do something with tentacles, and thinking that once I got it made and it had claws and things, I was thinking, well, that looks like something a Klingon would eat before it's dead. I'm not forcing these ideas, they're just sort of coming. Right now, it's just where I am. I'm catering to myself or the little sci-fi fangirl inside of me maybe, but if other people like it, that's wonderful.
If you don't have any plans for this weekend, never fear. To fill the window in your cultural schedule, here are just a few of the festivals, fairs, exhibits and performances coming soon to spots near you. To learn more about these and other events in Louisiana, keep your eyes peeled for a copy of Country Roads magazine. And while we're at it, LPB's Art Rocks website features an archive of previous episodes, so to see any episode again, just log on to lpb.org. Turning now to a turbulent time in American history, World War II. At the height of the war, Japanese Americans endured prison conditions and great hardship while forced to live within internment camps. While imprisoned, men and women often harnessed the power of art to interpret, to survive, and to carry on. An exhibit now in Houston, Texas is spotlighting this unique body of work. Come take a look.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
It's a part of American history that's a very dark chapter. During the war, 120,000 Japanese Americans were put into the camps, forcibly removed from their homes on the west coast of the United States, put into 10 different internment camps in the interior U.S. My late father and his family were a farming family in the central coast of California, and they were forcibly removed from their home, and they had to leave their home with one suitcase each.
I was 13 and a half months old. My mother was pregnant with my younger brother then too. So I can see why they were very, maybe not scared, but anxious about where they were going. They had like 7 days to get everything together to go. Mom being pregnant, of course, stacked up on diapers because we could only take what you could carry.
My name is Delphine Hirasuna, and I am the author and curator of a book and show that is called The Art of Gammon, arts and crafts of the Japanese American internment camps, 1942 to 1946. Gaman, when I was growing up, that was the word that every adult said. If I said, I don't like school, I don't want to go, it was like you just have to go, gaman, and just go anyway. When you talk to people, it occurred to me that everybody said the same word, gaman. I think that when they initially got to camp, I don't think they were thinking of making arts and crafts, but because their living unit had no furniture, it started out just trying to take care of their basic necessities. And because they were held there 3.5 to 4 years, at some point it was like, okay, we've made our furniture, let's see, something to beautify the barrack. And so part of it was just looking for ways to keep themselves entertained, keep themselves from going nuts. What they will find are objects made from found material and scrap, so indigenous things. And it runs the gamut from paintings, mostly watercolor paintings, wood carvings. There are a couple of objects in this show that belong to my family. One is a carved elephant on a globe, and that was done by my grandfather in camp. And then another one is the 1,000-stitch sash. The sash that we have in the show belonged to my uncle. The most common objects that were made were little wooden bird pins and shell pins. When I started doing the book, I decided that I did not want to have an airplane made from a kit. So, my criteria was that it had to be something made from scrap or found materials. And that really defines the show, that people made these things from things they found. There's a cane here made out of cactus. There's a train made from tin cans and file cabinet parts and watch dials and things like that. They were really inventive in what they made. After the war, they didn't see what they made as art, and so they didn't value them as anything more than, as they say, busy work. It was busy work. What I want people to come to the show and realize that the people who were put in camps were individuals, were human beings who had a sensitivity, and to think about what they created and where their interests were.
I think everyone has realized to brand your enemy by the way they look, the way they talk, and maybe the people that they associate with. And I will say for a fact that maybe not my generation, but the generation after is much more vocal about injustices and human rights and the mistakes that the government made and later admitted to. So I think that part is nice, and there's been a movement all over to let this not happen again.
It's obviously a personal story because, my family went through that. But I hope that as many Houstonians and Texans could come and view the exhibit at the Holocaust Museum, because there's such a positive message. Out of the darkest chapters in parts of her life, something just wonderful and beautiful can be created.
Consider the wrath of Mother Nature. When most of us see dangerous weather, we go in search of shelter. But photographer and filmmaker Stephen Locke does the exact opposite. Locke tracks down storms, getting as close as possible to capture the full extent of Mother Nature's fury on camera. Let's follow his journey into the eye of the storm.
One of the things that's beautiful in this world, one of these things as humans that we find beautiful is power, great power. And thunderstorms have great power. So as we watch a thunderstorm coming across the plains, the rain is falling and that's nurturing the soil and the crops. But at the same time, you have torrential rain and destructive hail and deadly lightning. So when you're watching a supercell thunderstorm, with or without a tornado, you're watching the act of creation and destruction simultaneously. Storms, of course, are very dramatic and very exciting, especially on the Great Plains. Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, those center states right through the middle of the country, these have the strongest storms in the world. Well, the season is generally springtime into early summer. That's when the atmosphere is most volatile and capable of producing supercell thunderstorms. The first thing I do when I get up in the morning is forecast. There's some basic data that I look at. I try to give myself a sense of what the atmosphere looks like 10 days out, 5 days out, 3 days out. Severe storm forecasting is just a tool to get you into close proximity of the storm. Ultimately, my purpose in being there is art.
But I bet you this may be the storm that moves into Kansas. Relax.
Don't grip the wheel, you know. It's a little tense.
When you're in chase mode and you're watching these storms develop, you're in a hurry. A lot of times I don't get to fully enjoy the storm till later on when I look at those images or look at Stephen's time lapse.
You have to work quickly, and it is difficult to compose the image quickly, particularly because you're driving into a landscape that you've never looked at before. You don't know what's over the next horizon, and the storm is evolving rapidly, and so you have to jump out now and make it happen.
Scud rising everywhere. Yeah. So this is the updraft region of the storm.
Sometimes I'm lucky, you know, I've been oftentimes looking for a spot to shoot a storm, and then there'll just be this cute little abandoned building. A gift from the universe that I pull up and put that into my shot. I like for myself and for my viewers to see how the storm evolves. I want people to be able to look at my time-lapse movies and look at that and say, yeah, I can see how a supercell moves.
There are chases we go on where, you know, it might be a cap bust. You know, the storms just don't develop. Everything looks good, the ingredients are there. Sometimes it just doesn't happen, but when it does, it's very rewarding.
Oh wow, check that out. That actually looks really nice.
There's a lot of work in what Stephen does. It's amazing to watch him set up 2-3 cameras. You know, he's got a few different things he uses and gets his tripods out.
I was initially disappointed in the structure of that storm, and at the time I was shooting it, I really didn't feel good about what I had, but when I got back and looked at the images and the time-lapse on the computer screen, I actually was pretty impressed with the quality of the light coming from the sunset. We had that warm alpenglow, that warm, sweet light, and the storm has got enough movement and enough gorgeous light that I think it's actually a nice time-lapse. For years, I had always wanted to shoot a shelf cloud coming over the downtown area. So for many years, I've been running down to Liberty Memorial to shoot storms coming over the city. I remember wondering, should I go, should I not go? And it turned out to be a really beautiful storm. And that was a storm that impacted a lot of people in the metro area because, you know, it was one of those busy Friday nights where everybody's out on the town and everyone's watching this very scary cloud come over the city. I love supercell thunderstorms. Nothing gets me present the way a supercell thunderstorm does. And in fact, I can remember, you know, some of the very, very earliest experiences I would have in the middle of nowhere with thunderstorms at night, I'm having this euphoric spiritual experience. Over time I've learned that just means that you're absolutely present. The past dissolves, the future dissolves, and you're absolutely present with what is.
Back in Louisiana now to share another chapter in this state's textured history. At the height of the Civil War, Confederate soldiers spent months building 2 forts in the Alexandria area. They, and the slaves they directed, built huge walls of dirt to serve as barriers to protect Forts Randolph and Buhlow from Union soldiers traveling up and down the Red River. Both forts are now preserved as Louisiana State Historic Sites. Here's Park Ranger Richard Holloway to tell us more.
This site is to commemorate Forts Randolph and Buhlow and also Bailey's Dam. The Confederates built these forts to prevent a third Red River campaign. The Union had come up the Red River to take all the cotton and to go to Texas. And so finally the Confederates realized if they stop them here in Alexandria, they won't be able to go any further. And so they built the 2 forts. And the reason they built 2 is because there were 2 big piles of dirt that were just hills. And they decided, since they were offset from one another, that if concentrating their fire, they could both fire down the river at the same time and not hit each other. So they built 2 forts for the protection of Alexandria. These were hills, and what they did was they dug out at the bottom of the hill around it and put the dirt to make the outer wall of the fort. So you had the outer wall of the fort, the moat of the fort, and then you had the big fort part at the top where the cannons would be in fire, because you can see pretty far from the top of the fort. In 1865, after the Civil War, General Custer came here and toured the forts, and his wife documented that he was so impressed with the size of the forts. He had said he had never seen any of that size. They're pretty massive even today because they were preserved on the mental hospital property before it was turned over to state parks. And so you will see in the back 35, 40 feet tall earthen walls, which is sort of an anomaly in today's Civil War earthen forts. One of the things you'll find in the museum is where we're sitting now, which was the winter cabin, which was a major thing here in 1864, 1865 during the winter. You saw thousands of these. And so we wanted to give the public an idea of what one of them would look like on the inside. It has a lot of stuff in here, but if you notice, most of it's just clothes. They didn't have a lot of clothes, so they had to repair what they had. Sometimes you'd ask for stuff from home, but more than likely they were suffering too. Your shoe leather was just as important as your clothing, and so you had to preserve it at all counts. One of the things that they would do, if they noticed their shoes were flopping and their heels were flopping, is they'd get some nails and they'd put them together around the edges, and that way it would hold them together. Actually, prior to that, the shoes were held together by wooden pegs. I have a quilt made by my great-great-grandmother. It was made for my great-great-grandfather, who was stationed here at Fort Randolph during the Civil War, and it's in great condition, and I'm honored to put it on display here at the fort. This particular map is a map of Fort Buhlow and Fort Randolph, and it shows the designer. It's done by Lieutenant Buhlow. It shows the area where the water is and all the essential things. So he was a pretty good engineer and made a really fine map. We have a lot of cannon ammunition here, and a lot of it was used up at Mansfield, up the road about 2 hours. That was a major battle in 1864, so a lot of that is on loan from that area. The cannonballs are of varying sizes. No matter what size, though, the projectiles were able to go 2 miles. Imagine sitting there in camp 2 miles away from anybody that you can't see, and all of a sudden a cannonball comes in the middle of your campfire. So that's something you'd have to be worried about all the time. The medicine cabinet has a lot of original elixirs in it. Snake oil salesmen were pretty popular back then. They would try to sell stuff to the soldiers all the time. Mainly the stuff was alcohol based, so an officer would not want his troops to be using that stuff, but they did. Some of it smells to high heaven, but I imagine that's from being 155 years old. Bailey's Dam was built by a Union officer named Bailey, who didn't want to see the fleet destroyed. What happened is The Yankees didn't, I guess, know whenever this area gets to late spring, all the water drains out. And prior to 1983, when they put the lock and dam system in, you could see it. Every late March, early April, the water would go all the way down, and it would be just like several feet worth of water left. I mean, there wouldn't be much left. And so the Yankee fleet came up when there was high water. They got stuck here, and they tried to escape to New Orleans after the defeat at Mansfield, and they couldn't do it. So what they did was had Colonel Bailey, he came and made a suggestion of making a dam across the river and then several wing dams up the river to raise the water level, and the boats would go up and on the raised area, and then they would blow the dam and the boats would wash down.
That's going to do it for this edition of Art Rocks. But remember, art lover, you can always watch episodes of the show at lpb.org/artrocks. And if that's not enough for you, Country Roads Magazine is a great resource for enriching your cultural life with art, cuisine, escapes and events all across the state. So until next week, I've been James Fox Smith, and thank you for watching.